Hello, good morning, kia ora, and welcome to this NRCoP National Hybrid Event on the Power of Prioritisation. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Kerry Lever. I'm the co-chair of the South Australian chapter, and I'll be your host for this event. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Kaurna people, traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. I also pay my respects to the traditional lands from which you are all joining us today, and I further extend my respects and acknowledge Maori as Tangata Whenua and Treaty of Waitangi partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and pay my respect to Maori in attendance today. So we're coming to you live from Adelaide, where we have a room full of really enthusiastic regulators, all keen to hear about this really important challenge that most of you would be facing. And we also have an online audience joining us from across the country today. Okay, so before I introduce our panel, I just need to give you a few points about our webinars. So they are recorded and they're made available on the NRCoP YouTube channel. We're using the Q&A function in Zoom today for our online audience, and we really encourage you to post questions to our panel. We'll leave lots of time at the end to allow those questions to be asked. If you like the look of another question, you can upvote it. If this live stream does happen to cut out, please stay with us. The NRCoP team will be working in the background to get us back online. But if your internet connectivity drops out, we suggest that you just restart that connection and then rejoin the Zoom webinar. So now to our panel. I want to introduce each of our speakers, and that will be in order of appearance today. So firstly, welcome to Peter Dicker. He's the Director of Dispute Assistance at Fair Work Ombudsman. Welcome, Peter. Along with Peter, we have Kate. Kate Alcock is the Director of Strategy and Capability, Complaints and Incidents Branch at the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, and she's also joined by her colleague Matt Dukovic, who's the Director of Compliance Transformation, Data and Regulatory Transformation and Enabling Services at the same commission. So for more information about our speakers, please do visit the event registration site and you can see their full bios. All right, so time to get started. Peter, could I ask you to take the lectern and talk to us about your experiences? Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Kerry. And you'll have to bear with me. I've recently torn my ACL impersonating a 20-year-old playing soccer. So I'm going to lean against the lectern today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm joining you, the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Here we go. Okay. Across jurisdictions, regulators face the same tension. Infinite demand, finite resources, and high expectations. Expectations from the people that come to us, to our stakeholders, to our authorising environments, and even our own staff who are generally wanting to add value to the community. We need insight, not just to be consumed by the people in front of us, but we need patterns, behaviours and risks across sectors. To balance these tensions, we need to prioritise. And we all do prioritise. The question is, do we do that deliberately? And that's what I want to talk to you today about, is how prioritisation, when done deliberately, can be an indispensable strategic discipline for the modern regulator. My name is Peter Dicker, and I'm proud to be the Director of Dispute Assistance at the Fair Work Ombudsman. Each year, about 40 staff handle 16,000 workplace disputes across a market of 15 million workers and about 1 million workplaces. Like many of you, every day we deal with urgency, emotion and expectation, from workers who are seeking justice and from businesses who are either confused or potentially defensive. Like you, we live with the tension of demand, resources and delivery. And today I want to share with you how we at the Fair Work Ombudsman have reshaped our operating model and shaped the way that we prioritise what we want to work on to achieve our strategic objectives. In 2023, we, like many regulators, equated fairness with identical treatment. Our language reinforced this, indicating to the public that we were running an all-encompassing investigation-led model. If you approach us at the time with a workplace dispute, you would hear, "Thank you for your statement. We will use it to assess if we want to investigate." Sounds reasonable for a regulator. We collected statements and asked sharp questions and assessed whether we could build a case. Doing this, however, sent the wrong message to our customers. What our workers heard was, if we scream loud enough, you'll take our case on. And businesses heard, if I can just convince you they're wrong, you'll leave me alone. Our demand started to balloon, our investigation started to stretch out, and our enforcement was actually focused on who was shouting the loudest at us. Staff fatigue was setting in across the agency. Treating everyone the same was not making it fairer, it was making us more noisy and less effective. In 2024-25, our newly appointed Fair Work Ombudsman, Anna Booth, signalled a major shift: strategic enforcement. Unlike a first in, first out approach, strategic enforcement prioritises interventions based on impact. It's about positively changing the behaviour of duty holders in either a priority sector or a geographic location. We embraced tripartism with non-state actors and started to collaborate with other regulators. We continue to publish our priorities each year. These are industry sectors we feel we can have the most impact in. We establish reference groups, inviting unions and employers' associations to work with us in understanding the priority sectors and co-design approaches. For example, late last year, in preparing for a proactive investigation in the western suburbs of Adelaide, we engaged the Australian Hotels Association and United Workers Union, without giving away all of our details of where we wanted to go, to gain insights on what was happening in those local communities. At the time, the algal bloom was just starting and it was impacting businesses. Some of our inspectors were coming from interstate and had no idea what was happening off our beaches. This example shows how much impact we can have when we work with others in the community who know what's going on and actually want to be part of the solution. When inspectors spend all their time managing demand, however, collaboration is one of the first things we lose. So to build our strategic enforcement model, it was essential we started to reset expectations and be explicit about the two roles that we play. We now separate the customer experience, so what we do when people come to us with their dispute, from intelligence and enforcement, pursuing strategic investigations that we want to. In clearly separating these roles, we aim to reduce frustration with our customer base by setting up a system where service and enforcement can coexist, not compete. Let me try and explain our model using a metaphor. Oh, there's our priority areas. Here's our prioritisation model if it was depicted as a highway. When someone comes to us with a workplace dispute, usually it's a worker who believes they've been underpaid or exploited and they're looking for justice, they get on our customer experience highway. Today, a customer approaches us, here's a very different message. Thank you for your information. You have options. Our job here is to help you understand them and navigate them. Notice the language shift from our old model. Our previous model was all about us and we. Our new language is all about empowering the customer. No implied promise of an investigation. Right from the moment they hit our website, we're upfront with them about our service offering. We're here to help them take control. A dispute assistance officer helps them understand their issues, their rights, and what they're hoping to achieve. Most importantly, we're trying to understand what options will match what their actual interests. When we reach out to the other party of the dispute, usually it's an employer or a former employer, we offer the same service to them and help them co-create solutions as well. In a relatively short time, a party to a dispute reaches their exit at the customer choice fork. Here, the party will make a choice, either resolve their dispute directly or continue their dispute independently. And that choice can happen in the first interaction. The dispute is theirs. The choice is theirs. Now, before I take you through the next part of our model, I want to share with you 3 things that we had to prioritise and tackle to get this model right. The first was capability. Our aim from the outset was to design a world-class customer experience. Our dispute officers require a very specific skill set. It's a tough gig to offer service and get in between 2 parties of a dispute without taking it on yourself. Our model requires officers who can clearly explain the options without overcommitting, empower customers without doing it for them, and identify solutions without signalling enforcement intent. So we prioritise the capability uplift. We created an accredited training that focuses on bringing together the best advisory practices, restorative justice theories, and dispute resolution skills. We also train them in knowledge of the whole workplace relations ecosystem. They can't provide options to parties if they don't know what those options are. We retrained our frontline staff on how to clearly explain our service offering, what other options people have, and ask them to choose. We also equipped our investigation teams with how to get information on duty holders they may wish to investigate in the future based on our risk and assessment profile, which I'll get to in a moment. The second thing we needed to manage was the internal perception, how we see ourselves. In most enforcement agencies, legitimacy is tied to visible compliance action. You know the drill. Investigations started, notices issued, fines imposed. Our change management strategy was based on aligning our people to understand that we simply cannot do everything, and that our impact comes from the choices we make and where to intervene, not just how many investigations we get through each year. In fact, one of our definitions in dispute assistance is actually assisting a customer navigate their issues independently, well-informed, exercising their free will, and without ongoing reliance on state resources. This approach has allowed us to free up the resources to go out and actually find the vulnerable people in our community who won't approach a government agency. The third area was external expectations. Our customers needed to view their experience on the highway as a genuine value-adding service. Thank you. Where both choices lead to a credible outcome for what they need. In many systems, escalation, or in our case, investigation, is seen as the only path that really matters. And when people believe this, they lock onto us, even when it won't help. When we aligned our language across policy, our website, and our info line, externally, we were leveraging our tripartite relationships to spread the word on how we were going to operate and sought their feedback. Doing this managed expectations. It actually gave us institutional and political cover for the way we wanted to work. We've prioritised working closely with organisations such as the Commonwealth and state-based tribunals to help co-create resources for parties who may want to choose that pathway. A big shout out to the South Australian Employment Tribunal, one of our country's most citizen-friendly and efficient tribunals. The most common feedback we now receive is gratitude. Gratitude for people having the chance to be heard, that they have options, and that we take the time to give them practical guidance on what they can do. With those foundations in place, the rest of our agency gets to invest in what can really make a long-term difference. And that brings me to the next part of our model. And this is the model that helps us prioritise pursuing strategic investigations in areas that we want to and potential duty holders that we want to target. Running parallel to our very busy customer experience highway, and importantly invisible to our customers, is our intelligence and enforcement service road. While customers move along their highway, we reserve the right to take an exit and assess risk signals and patterns relating to duty holder behaviour. This is what gives us control without raising expectations. It allows us to assess information, We can loop back to the highway if we want to. We can take an exit if we want to. The customer doesn't know that we're doing this. I'll take you through a little bit how it works. Our dispute assistant officers use our compliance and enforcement policy and prioritisation and categorisation framework to disaggregate the information away from what the parties of the disputes are trying to achieve. In all interactions, our officers are paying close attention to the seriousness of the allegations, the duty holders' behaviour and their posture towards workplace laws, and the context in which we're receiving the information. This disaggregation of information allows us to treat the customer's request in a timely manner. For example, when they come to us, they're just interested in getting what their minimum entitlements are. And yet it also allows us to consider whether we, as an agency, need to dedicate resources to a particular duty holder. A dualist regulatory mindset forces us into a false choice. Either we help the customer resolve the dispute, or we escalate and enforce the law. Our system rejects this premise, and we believe that we can serve a customer in real time, and leads us to call it exercise broader compliance and enforcement when we consider it warranted. And that leads me to two more things that we had to get right to ensure that our model was sustainable and credible. Whenever you reduce investigation volumes, it's an immediate risk that people, both internally and externally, think you've exited the arena. And that's exactly where enforcement agencies become quite rightly nervous and cautious about their public perception, or as James Shipton calls it, their regulatory credibility. This is why FWO now communicates about our impact, not volumes or activities. Selective enforcement is not weak, it's strategic. And finally, the risk that gets the most attention from enforcement authorities: can you enforce without escalating the dispute? Yeah, we can, because the service road exists. We've built systems in our model that surface patterns in our jurisdiction. Our dispute assistance officers can pause at any time and bring the information they've surfaced to a case conference, and we can discuss. They can use flagging mechanisms to notify us, to signal when they believe a duty holder may need further assessment, even when the dispute has been resolved. This information feeds into a separate assessment and triage function, where duty holders are reviewed and added to watch lists for our investigations teams to consider. They may choose to take action now, they may choose to take action in the future. Prioritisation is allowing us to manage the volume of demand while still ensuring nothing valuable is lost. The system is designed to ensure that the FWO can address serious and systemic non-compliance. I'll give you an actual example of our highway. A worker used our dispute assistance service after trying to resolve the dispute themselves in the workplace. We couldn't reach the employer. They were playing hard to get. So our officers checked with the worker, well, what would you like to do now? And armed them with information about the options that matched their interests. In this particular case, the worker felt they had everything they needed and was confident to navigate the small claims jurisdiction. Importantly, that's where their dispute ended with us. We didn't escalate it beyond what they needed. However, separately, our assessment systems saw the employer appear several times with the same issues. And it's that pattern, not the individual dispute, that triggered a compliance and enforcement action. A Fair Work inspector conducted an investigation and issued a compliance notice for all affected workers. That employer ultimately ended up paying over $78,000 to 14 workers. In this example, the worker was free to choose how they would like to pursue their dispute using their timeline, and we were free to choose whether to investigate the employer on our timeline. The model, like I said, the model supports 16,000 disputes each year. Previously, 30% would head to investigation. Now only 3% do. As has explained, this change has freed up our resources to do the compliance work we choose to do. Self-initiated investigations are up 175%, and we've moved beyond the simple one-on-one interaction. We're making a much bigger impact in our priority sectors. In the university sector alone, we've recovered over $187 million for over 99,000 employees, and we continue to do this work. We are changing the culture of non-compliance in this sector by working with a broad range of stakeholders to raise concerns, discuss issues, promote our resources, and encourage universities to take their compliance with workplace law seriously. We'll be publishing a full impact report in 2027 once all of our investigations are concluded. This is the impact that we're aiming for: systemic change and sustainable compliance. I'll close with this. As Stephen Covey said, the key is not to prioritise what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities. Prioritisation isn't about doing less, it's about doing what matters. Without deliberate prioritisation, noise drives action, urgency replaces judgment, and impact becomes accidental. By separating the customer experience from enforcement, we believe we're building a model that can have an impact at scale with the resources that we actually have. As regulators, we can be overwhelmed complaint handlers, or we can be strategic stewards who protect the public and use our scarce capacity wisely. When we prioritise with discipline, we create space for excellence and enforcement that truly matters. Thank you. Questions, Dave?
Thank you so much, Peter. You feel free to take the weight off that injury, and really appreciated you walking us through, particularly with the highway metaphor. That was a really useful way of allowing us to understand your changes. I'm now going to invite Kate up to the stage, and then Matt will follow her. So up to you, Kate.
All right, thank you, Kerry. I'm Kate, and as Kerry's indicated, Matt will follow me shortly after. We're from the NDIS Quality Safeguards Commission, and we're here today to talk about our risk-based regulatory prioritisation model. Firstly, I also wanted to acknowledge the lands in which we meet. We have Victoria Square, or what the Kaurna people would call the Tarn Tanyanga, which is a meaning of Red Kangaroo Rock Place and is quite close to where we meet today. And I thought something worth highlighting. It's a traditional meeting place where the Kaurna people would come and share stories and celebrate their ceremonies. And I thought it held a lovely synergy to today's community of practice. So what we're going to first talk about is setting the scene. So who are we, what do we do, and what were some of our drivers for change? Before moving on to talking about our model and what that's comprised of, we've got some preliminary data to share before finishing up with some implementation activities that we're still working on to develop and mature our model. So we're at a little bit of a different stage to what Pete's talked about, and so sharing really our insights and our journey to date. So first, setting the scene. We are the national regulator for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. It was established by the federal government to support people with significant and permanent disability. We have the National Disability Insurance Agency. They implement the scheme. We're often confused with them. They rather are the body who look at decisions around eligibility and access and funding, and we're the regulator of those supports. So we regulate all NDIS providers and workers. We regulate both registered and unregistered providers, and we have 280,000 providers in the market at present, and only 7% of those are registered. So it's a really challenging market in terms of visibility. We are an independent agency. We were first established in July 2018, so we started operations here in South Australia and also New South Wales as well, and we've rolled out incrementally across the years, and all states were in effect in December 2020. So we're still a fairly young regulator comparative to our Commonwealth peers. We secure compliance with the NDIS Act 2013 and have a number of different regulatory functions, including our reportable incidents, complaints, provider registration, and also behaviour support functions as well. So, drivers for change, a really shocking image. This is a caption from a Four Corners episode that aired in September 2023. It spoke of high risk and abusive practices, and our then Commissioner featured. It caused a lot of public scrutiny. It was damning of the way that we regulated, and rightly so. And shortly after, our then Minister also issued actions to our then Commissioner to follow. In the same year, we also had a Comcare improvement notice issued, which spoke to psychosocial risks to our staff. So I highlight these two events because they're part of our story. They're part of what's prompted our evolution and the approach and model that we have moved to. They speak to a number of different issues and again, drivers for change. We too have seen a huge upward trajectory of volume. So if we look at the 2018-19 financial year, we received 1,422 complaints. In the last financial year, that was just short of 35,000. We have a huge rapid growth in the sector. So each quarter we have about 25,000 participants entering the scheme. Matt, can you get my water? Thank you. And also, if we compare the 23-24 financial year with that of the 24-25, we've seen a 25% increase in active providers in the market as well. We've had a number of challenges in regards to not having suitable procedures or guidance material for how we assess risk. So we've had very different subjective assessments occurring on those matters. We've had a system that's not been fit for purpose, so really sort of captured these matters in quite a siloed fashion, which has prompted siloed ways of working. We've had numerous channels for which we receive incoming information into the Commission as well, and all of these aspects are what gave rise to us needing to look at a different way of working. We weren't regulating with impact, we weren't instilling trust, and we've had matters that have at times sort of sat there in queues beyond sort of 12 months before participants are getting outcomes, and really not looking at that root cause of provider non-compliance, more so taking that individual transactional response to all of these matters coming through, and with finite resources, effectively couldn't continue in that fashion. So that's given rise to our now risk-based regulatory prioritisation model and the approach that we're now taking. So we have really had to evolve in keeping with the disability landscape. We've considered a number of different inputs to design our model. We've looked toward our strategic roadmap, which talks to our priorities and our principles in being a formidable regulator, a human rights regulator. We've looked at our community Commonwealth best practice principles of regulation, so we're taking a whole of system approach and being data-driven and leveraging off that. And I've also looked at different regulators, so like yourselves, the Aged Care Quality Safeguard Commission, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, which I now know why they just say ACCC, because that's a bit of a Peter Pepper Piper all in there. And really to sort of look at what are those other risk-based approaches that are happening across the sector with regulators like yourselves. So this is what our four-tiered operational model looks like. If there was a competition in diagrams, Pete, I think you've picked me on this one. But really what our model sort of marks the shift of, similar to what sort of Pete's described, is moving from that individual assessment really to looking at the identification of systemic risks and the identification of high priority matters that require regulatory action. So it's a well-considered workflow designed to be responsive to those matters of greatest need and priority, having the greatest impact or concern for the quality and safety of participants in the market. So each tier, we have designed a procedure which now more clearly describes the scope, the responsibilities, the process, the decisions that each of the teams at that part of the workflow operate by. That's really helped us to look at preventing that duplication and getting more sort of timely decisions. So tier one, that reflects where we have incoming information coming into the Commission. It might be reportable incidents by our registered market on our portal, or complaints through a number of different channels, be that by email, web form, phone. We're really at this point in time looking at, is it in jurisdiction of the Commission? So making those more timely decisions and onward referral if it's not for us. We're looking at risks of harm and more timely referral to our person-centred team, but we're ultimately also gathering information to have a really good understanding of what are the concerns that are being raised about the provider or worker. We also undertake some practices around making sure that we're finding any duplicates and teaming those matters up on system, and also identifying those that are of a more low-grade consumer dispute nature and providing that sort of timely advice back to complainants to be able to address those matters direct with the provider. When we're moving down to Tier 2, this is really when we're lifting up and out of just that single matter. So we've got now good record keeping. Tier 1's looked at getting all of our matters on system so that we're actually starting to have that visibility across our agency and across our teams. And we're really now at Tier 2 starting to profile and look at what does this new matter say in respect to every other piece of information we hold about that provider. So are we starting to see themes and trends and that accumulative risk emerge? We've introduced a newly developed risk assessment tool called our Enterprise Prioritisation criteria, and we're using this to be able to make that determination around high priority matters, and I'll go through that in a moment. Those matters that are high priority are moved down to what we call Tier 3. Tier 3 is where we have a strategic coordination team supporting an executive operational panel. So it's effectively the governance component of our model. The strategic coordination team review all of our high priority matters and present them to panel on a weekly basis. It's a real point of difference now where we're really seeing all of the high priority matters on the table at the same time, and the SES, who are responsible for our operational resources, making decisions as a collective. What they're also considering here is what is the best way to have impact with the nature of alleged breaches that have come to the fore. So really considering all of our regulatory levers and potentially at times using them in unison. Those matters that are allocated go down to Tier 4, and that's the real guts of our regulatory action. It's our investigations, our site visits, our statutory tools, compliance notices, infringements. We're also currently in Tier 2 trialling and testing some tools of a more non-statutory kind. So warning letters, advice assistance, that more light touch but proportionate regulatory action for those matters that don't reach that high priority determination. So this is our risk assessment tool. It's applied at Tier 2 in terms of reaching those, supporting the determination of high priority matters. It has 3 dimensions. They're equally all important. It's not a prescriptive tool. Each of these 3 dimensions has a number of different risk criteria that staff use to really support their critical analysis of information that's coming through. So the serious component looks at what are the incidents or the nature of what's occurring, what are the types of harm, are we looking at death, is there more significant human rights breaches, and what's the scale of impact as well, is it one participant or a broader cohort that are impacted. It also captures some demographic factors as well that can again raise the risk profile or implications of harm. So considerations around the vulnerability of participants, maybe be that where they could be living in the country, their capacity, their ability to communicate their needs and seek help or not, where there might be participants who don't have other more personal natural supports around them, and so less visibility or protection from an advocacy perspective. Our contravention dimension is considering those risks in relationship to the legislative obligations of providers. So it really captures our legal framework, what our Act and our associated rules prescribe for what good looks like in terms of quality and safety service provision, and looking at the relationship between the risks and harms that are occurring with that of potential sort of alleged breaches. And lastly, the strategic dimension is where there could be a more sensitive nature to the issues that are coming through, be that with ministerial attention, media, but also where they might be thinking about the type of response that we need to pay. So it might be a co-regulatory response, and it might be those more statutory tools. So we're starting to get officers to think about what's the seriousness, how egregious is the alleged breach in terms of the type of regulatory response that those types of concerns would require. And this all helps inform their determination of a high priority matter to go through to Tier 3 as described. I want to point out that high priority determination, again, similar to what Pete's talked about, is really an accumulation and a consolidation of multiple incidents and multiple complaints that we're receiving. So really looking at being able to consider the breadth of information that we have and really sort of house that with concern of a systemic nature and mobilise that down. We're also using the EPC to inform the decision-making principles of OEP in terms of those high priority matters that are coming through. And that's also a place for further consolidation. So at Tier 2, we're consolidating based on the systemic nature for a provider. And at Tier 3, they're really then starting to look at what does the high priority matters maybe say about a more sector-wide issue, where there then can be further consolidation based on those high priority matters, informing more of a planned intervention. And Matt will talk of some of those examples in a moment. We're also just starting to test the introduction of this EPC at Tier 4 as well. So if we've had information come through, it's hit that high priority marker, it's ended up on the books of one of our Tier 4 officers and they've gone out on site and maybe those concerns haven't been validated or verified once talking to participants or looking at systems, then they're able to again use this criteria to be able to reprioritise. Similarly, that could scale up or down the type of intervention that's required. So a bit of a snapshot in practice. We have incrementally rolled our model out. So we started the project in August 2004. We started testing components of Tier 1 and 2 in November 2024 and then further in April last year as well. And so we started with just a smaller cohort of staff, testing these processes and our risk assessment tool, again, with just a smaller cohort of staff and matters. And then on the 7th of July, we rolled out Tiers 1 and 2 to all our staff and teams doing the work and all of our incoming matters. So the snapshot in practice, have some data that just starts to talk to our incoming complaints, but also our finalisation of them. So when we started the model, we had in excess of 20,000 complaints in queues awaiting assessment. And as I mentioned, around our Tier 2 practices now, and really looking at that consolidation and what our information and the thematics of that say for a provider, you can see that now we're starting to finalise more matters than what we're receiving, and it's really sort of going toward that consolidated related practice at Tier 2. On the far right, it talks to the number of high priority determinations that have come from our incoming complaints to date. This is a specific trial and test that we had put in place for our Tier 1 practices. So again, looking at aligning the incoming complaints by phone with regulatory officers doing the work, but also with our clearer parameters around what we're able to take on, what's for us, what's not, and also those parameters around the more dispute resolution and being able to put onus back on providers and connect complainants with providers for those more lower grade issues. These are some of the stats sort of coming through for what we're seeing so far. So really the key is that to date, in the first 4 weeks of implementing our Tier 1 process for complaints by phone, we're seeing in the first fortnight 83% resolved at that first entry mark, and again 82% for the second fortnight. So before we started testing this, we had this work managed over different teams, and so again what we've really tried to do is have a really defined procedure and work scope and decisions to be able to make those more timely outcomes, and starting to see that in just some of our preliminary data. We've also got an average appearing in terms of starting to look at from receipt of complaints and reportable incidents when, again, we're able to give those more timely outcomes back to complainants. And similar, all of our complaints are finalised now at Tier 2. So we've really looked to separate out, take the issues and the themes from the matters coming through, and if on collection and using our risk assessment tool, that deems us to want to take a greater look at the provider, that mobilises down in a separate source, and yet we'll have the dialogue with the complainant to say, thank you, it's with us now, and really sort of providing that outcome there. So 40 business days from receiving matters now to being able to give that outcome. Our high priority matters, we're starting to see some stats appear around 28 days for our complaints to make a high priority determination, and a little bit lower for our reportable incidents, 24. So not too bad when we sort of factor in that at that front end we might be needing to gather further information and give certain days for providers to be able to get back to us on that. So our model has also been around not now being able to do everything, but really be able to use the masses, find the systemic breaches, lift out the matters that matter and mobilise them across that workflow in a timely way. I'll now hand over to Matt. He has some case examples to share.
Thanks, Kate, and good afternoon, everybody. Oh, it's actually good morning still. It feels like afternoon. So today, as Kate said, I was just going to run you through a couple of case examples to actually bring the model to life and to demonstrate the impact that it's having on the work of the Commission. And then I'll finish off today just by talking a little bit more about some of the broader initiatives that are underway to underpin the model. So the first case study that I was going to run through is just about we received a report of a sudden market exit by an NDIS provider. Of course, these sorts of reports come on a Friday afternoon, and so when you look at the model that Kate was just showing up, it looks like a complex, long-winded. You think, God, it's going to take forever to get through this model, but actually, when the thresholds or the criteria are met, you can actually operationalise quite quickly. So when we received this report about this sudden market exit, we're able to bring together the operations executive panel within an hour of receiving that report, and we were able to then make sure that we developed a multidisciplinary response to that exit. So that involved engaging with the provider directly, making sure that other co-regulators that were available to assist, because obviously a market exit can mean that participants are left without supports, particularly over the weekend. And importantly, we're able to start building messaging and key supports so that if the market exit did eventuate, we were able to have timely advice to those participants or those workers and others that might have been involved. Now, in the past, before RPM, that model or that issue would have likely been handled just by the incoming receive, whoever received that information, and they would be left to call on existing relationships to deal with that issue. By having the approach set up, we're able to quickly bring together a group of the Brains Trust and really consider a whole Commission response to that issue. So responses can be swift, they can be proportionate, and obviously collaborative using the full range of levers. So the second case study that I was going to talk to you about is in relation to suitability. And we received a report about a disability support worker who had been arrested for distributing child abuse material. So again, pretty common type of report or incident that we come across. Through profiling efforts in Tier 2, we identified that the worker actually provided services to multiple participants on behalf of multiple providers. So that's where a worker works for several different providers to provide services. We then, through the assessment, found out that the worker had been released on conditional bail, which meant that there was a real risk of that worker being able to then start working one of their jobs. So we were able to escalate quickly and allocate that matter out of session and actually have that worker removed from the market and negate the risks to participants. So having a full understanding, and at that Tier 2 level, as Kate mentioned, having a full understanding about the entity of the issue can really make a big impact on making sure that we're getting to the highest priority matters first. Because when you're in a high volume area where you're getting lots of information from different sources, potentially about the same issue, you need to be able to really pull that information together quickly and factor that into your decision making. That's no mean feat when we're talking about the volumes that Kate mentioned. So we generally will take on that, we'll make sure that those decisions are based on a case-by-case basis, because that's an important factor from a regulator's perspective, but it's really about building our knowledge of the worker, the provider, the participant, or the issue, because some of that information can actually then highlight particular participants are at risk because they've had several incidents that relate to them as an individual, as opposed to a worker that might have multiple issues affecting them. The third case study that I was going to mention is about our approved quality auditors, and this example demonstrates the use of all of those regulatory levers to handle such an issue. So the report was that through our intelligence activities, we identified that an approved quality auditor was not conducting audits in accordance with their requirements. They were doing the dodgy and submitting false audits, or ones that hadn't been potentially completed. Through additional profiling, matter was considered by the panel, and we were able to enact a multidisciplinary response. So very quickly, in a short time order, we've been able to ban several individuals from being involved in delivering services to the NDIS. We're able to vary the registration condition of several registered providers, requiring them to have new audits undertaken to make sure that they had appropriate operations in place. We varied the registration conditions of other providers to review all audits that were undertaken in a particular time period. The development of a media and communications plan to also address the issue on scheme integrity and making sure that the sector and workers and providers that were involved in this issue knew what to do and how to handle the situation. Again, seems common sense, but in our old operating model, these issues would have been handled in isolation within a working team and would not have been as comprehensive. So not only does it prioritise our work, but it actually starts to share the language and the understanding about risk and priorities, and helps to enable staff to identify those risks, those matters quicker, and escalate in a timely manner, rather than sitting in a queue for potentially, as Kate said, a year or two before we could act. In the fourth and final case study I share today, I want to provide an example about our thematic interventions. So, as Kate mentioned, our thematic interventions are coordinated activities targeted at systemic or broad issues affecting a larger part of the sector or higher risk problem. So through the model, we're collecting information which tends to pull out more sectoral type issues as much as the individual issues. And so one of our first interventions that we've pushed through the model focuses on dysphagia and targets providers delivering supports for people with severe dysphagia and or mealtime management arrangements. Really important, because this can lead to death with people providing unsafe mealtime management. So being able to use all our data holdings across the Commission in a new way and applying our risk approach, we identified 33 registered providers to be included in our intervention. And 7 of those were identified as needing or wanting. We wanted to actually send our inspectors out to do a targeted inspection. So our first inspections started happening before Christmas. During each of those inspections, our officers were able to inform those providers or remind those providers about their obligations around their requirements, and we checked on those relevant obligations. In good news, 2 of those initial site visits showed that those providers were found compliant with their obligations. However, non-compliance was detected at one others, and we've got several other site visits planned for later this year. Importantly, we were able to use that this intervention to really raise the profile of why this issue is important, not only for those people which were identified through our data holdings, but more broader in the sector. So we're able to develop some good, strong media and comms approach. And in fact, some of you may have seen some of that comms in the last month or so, targeting and talking about the Commission's activities in the mealtime management space. So again, these are all factors of being able to come together as a panel with, making sure that those SES that are responsible for various levers can come together. They are the decision makers. They can allocate resources very quickly to tackle issues. Again, they're all very important features of our model. And there are a million other case studies, and I'm more than happy to talk through them with anybody that's has interest afterwards, or through questions and answers. To finish up this morning, just wanted to also reflect on the other great work that the Commission's doing, because our risk-based priority model is just part of the jigsaw puzzle that is required of regulators. What we've got going on in the background is the development of sorry, I've lost my notes here. What we've got is the development of a risk-based framework. Sorry, now I found it. And this framework is going to... sorry, I should just go back a couple of steps. So our journey to become a more formidable regulator has taken us 18 months so far. So just wanted to press on to you that this isn't a race. This is a marathon. It takes time and effort to actually change the way in which operations. It involves cultural change. It involves systems change. It involves process change. And so over the next period, we're continuing to design, build and test and improve our model. Importantly, our work to implement the risk-based regulatory model is being underpinned or supported and enhanced by several other initiatives that are being delivered by the Commission. The risk-based framework is intended to provide the overall architecture to ensure the Commission's regulatory functions and intelligence are informed and evidence-based, and that will include identifying and oversight of market risks. So what do we mean about that? It's a lot of words. When you are only focused on those matters that are coming to you, that's informed by a community that understands, maybe limited, as to what your role is as a regulator. So the risk-based framework is intended to take a step back to make sure we're actually covering all of those other risks that may not be coming through our normal channels, and making sure that we have adequate controls put in place to identify them, or even raise awareness in the community about those other things that may not be featuring in their reporting to us at the moment. We've got the DART program. So the DART stands for the Data and Regulatory Transformation Program, and that is a new way of operating in the Commission, where we've got new designed workflows and technology to support new platforms and technological tools to actually collect that information in a new way. So we're going to have automated, revised complaint and RI notifications and third-party reports. And we're going to be improving how we receive, categorise and profile in line with what we're building here in the risk-based regulatory prioritisation model. And obviously that will enable and improve access to reliable data to help us educate the community about the expectations of the disability sector and the services that are provided. We're also, to back up that work, we've got the Quality Assurance Framework, and that's a foundational framework detailing how we will identify continuous improvements in the process. So this is about making sure that the risk-based regulatory prioritisation model is built on continuous improvement. Where the Quality Assurance Framework is going to ensure consistency and accountability of decisions that are made all the way through, support evidence-based decision-making, strengthen capability uplift for all of our staff, and importantly, help us to understand what is working well and what is not working so well, and where gaps are designing. And importantly, they will help us to meet our requirements under Australian Government Investigation Standards as well. All of that work is being supported by some amazing work being done by our external communications area, and that's really about trying to find opportunities to highlight the matters and issues and risks that we see coming through our model, and really empowering the community to understand those risks and empowering our participants to know how they can receive support and what they should be expecting from their providers when they access the NDIS scheme. So thank you for listening, and that is all I have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and our other speakers as well. It's very clear that there are lots of similarities. While the model itself might be different, you've clearly underpinned it, the two agencies, with some very similar principles. What stood out for me was the proactive nature of the model, and also that it's really taken a stewardship approach, thinking about the whole regulatory system within which you operate. What I wanted to, I just note that we've only got a few minutes left of the published time, but I am just going to, without your permission, go slightly over. And for those of you that need to sign off, completely understand, but of course you can access the full webinar later when we post the recording. But I do just want to be able to ask one or two questions that have been posted. Excuse me. So what I thought I'd do is just ask the two with the most votes. And the first one is, and there actually are a couple of themes coming through from our audience as well about what they'd really like you to deep dive into a little more. The first one is around impact, how you decided what information you needed to measure that impact, and what information was going to be able to demonstrate that you had achieved the impact that you set out to make. So is it okay if I start with you, Pete?
Is this on? So the question was about how we decide impact or measure impact?
Yeah, how did you go about determining what measures you needed to introduce to monitor impact and demonstrate achievement?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I guess I was reflecting when Matt was talking just now about how it takes an entire organisation to really bring these models to life. I mean, I get to stand up here and talk about my little slice, but there's, similar to Matt and Kate's area, there's a number of wonderful teams in our organisation that are working on how to use data, how to use intelligence systems, how to use technology. We're also looking at, well, how do you evaluate impact? And they're looking at different models on how to do that. So that is a new frontier for us, but one of the things that I will mention is moving away from just widget counting and actually looking at whether we are able to have that engagement with workplaces or stakeholders. So, for example, hats off to the crew that have been doing our horticulture strategy for a number of years now. And one example is our Queensland farmers went from having some of the lowest compliance rates in the country to now some of the highest. So they're the sort of impacts that we can measure. So I hope that answers the question, but it's an evolving moment for us.
I think if you don't mind me just extending that question a little, someone has also asked about how you manage measuring impact from the customer's perspective when they might feel that they haven't got the level of support that they were expecting to get from you.
Yeah, and that's why it's really important to be upfront. We have to be really upfront early on what we're here to do, and they've got a choice. And so how do we measure the impact? We keep an eye on stakeholder feedback or service complaints. We work closely with our policy team to look what's coming through our authorising environment channels, so through the Minister's office, for example. And it was one of the risks that we saw with our model early on. If I go into widgets, which I don't really like to, when you look at the volume we deal with, only less than 1% come through those channels as service complaints or disagreements. We'll always get people that are aggrieved with our service and what they think we're here to do, but we've had that under any model that we've got. And so we look at also the positive feedback that we get. We're currently looking at, can we measure customer experience and how we can do that, and that's all part of our evolution and continual growth.
Thank you. Same question to you, Matt.
It's a really good question, and I think measuring the effectiveness of compliance activities or regulation activities is probably one of the million-dollar questions, and it's a great question. I think it gets raised a lot. We're a little bit immature to be able to sort of give some targeted examples of that, but some of the discussions we've been having, and certainly I want to make it clear that for our activities, we are baking evaluation into the way we are developing our thematic interventions, for example. And some of the measures that we are considering or have been floating are things like an increased awareness, which would relate in, say, an increased number of reports. But where, we might be able to also start thinking about the severity or the nature of those reports that are coming in, so that you can actually start seeing the nature of those problems changing to hopefully less serious issues are some of the conversations we've been involved in recently. But it's a real challenge and tension between going from widget reporting, which is, what generally our bean counters want of us and expect of us, to what the community wants insofar as how their individual complaint or issue has been dealt with. And I think that as Peter says, it's about being clear with the community about how their information helps us regulate the sector, and then being clear about celebrating not celebrating, but being more transparent in the outcomes. How many people have we stopped from working in the sector who are poor quality? How many prosecutions have we done for activities and for what types of poor behaviour? The discussions we've been having.
Did you want to add to that, Kate?
Yeah, just the when you're saying like managing the expectation then of for us complainants, and we have just recently been looking at our website and updating with case examples and our complaints policy, so the different type of material again in terms of what we're looking to achieve. The dialogue and the conversation, I think that goes with finalising complaints and really trying to again point our complainants toward where are the different regulatory activities occurring so they can effectively see themselves in that. So if they're coming to us with an example of poor adherence to their meal plan, then as Matt's talked about, we can sort of be promoting and advertising that information is informing the very sort of thematic intervention that we're taking.
Thank you. So the other question that's got really high votes is around some more advice for our audience around how you get buy-in in an agency or a regulator that might be really entrenched in that reactive model that you guys have been striving to move away from. Any advice for our participants today?
Well, externally, that's one of the powers of involving the community. So we have a shared responsibility to compliance with workplace laws. I mean, ultimately it's the businesses who have the obligation to comply with the laws. So don't be afraid to go and talk to the community and make them part of the solution. Internally, again, as Matt touched on, be prepared that it's not a sprint. These institutional change takes 2-3 years sometimes, and you really need that senior buy-in and courage to stick with where you're going. And that comes back to the impact question. You want to see that impact coming through to give staff confidence that they're on the right track. I mean, all of our staff come to work because they want to add value, and they have their own sense of justice in themselves. So, really thinking about that change message and why we're doing it is really important, but you've got to do it over and over again, and that can be exhausting. So,
yeah, the work never ends. Matt?
I think tragically our motivation to act was spurred by those external factors, and obviously when you have those public shame events, it brings about a certain desire to make change a lot quicker, which is sometimes helpful, despite the tragic consequences that usually come with it. But I have worked in several regulators where you don't have that external factors coming into play that gives you that platform, and that's where I think you really need, as Peter says, it's relying on those relationships. It's what, how can you agitate within your sector to get that need for change to occur. So at the highest level, it's around how can you creatively, influence or lean on your groups to, to promote potentially some noise for, to get that change happening. Alternatively, if you're talking about a change within an organisation, that can be, just as challenging, where you've got, an operational area potentially trying to vie for resources with a policy area, for example, that, requires, again, relationships on making sure that you can demonstrate your value add to the organisation and build your authoring environment to enable change to occur.
Sounds a bit like your tripartite model, Steve, with really getting that call to action and shared vision set through those non-statutory approaches.
We're not a commission, so we can't say you have to do this service, otherwise we'll arbitrate. So we really have to invest in understanding the entire ecosystem that people can access and making people understand exactly where they can go to get what they need. It's tough because, as Matt mentioned, budgets are tight everywhere. So, you go talk and everyone feels that it's a good idea until someone has to do extra work that they haven't accounted for. So it takes time, it takes relationships, as Matt said, but it is worth the investment and being clear on where you're trying to head and the impact you can potentially have and show how we get there, yeah.
Thank you. That's a good note for us to start wrapping up on. I have managed to ask Kate, but I'm just going to tell Pete that we've got a few questions that we haven't been able to get to today, and it'd be lovely if we could take those offline and just write a response when we post the video, please. Thank you. Okay, so thank you to our panel. And of course to our online and in-person audiences for your participation today. We really appreciate it. And you will receive a short evaluation survey so we can measure impact on our events and whether they're hitting the mark for you. So it'd be wonderful if you could take a few minutes and fill that in. And I also want to just mention that enrolments for the professional regulator are open. That is our NRCoP bespoke professional development program, which comes highly recommended, really incredible satisfaction scores for that training, and it's delivered in collaboration with RegNet ANU. So if you're keen to hear more, you can go onto our website and learn more about that. Okay, so now I just want to mention very quickly that we've got some upcoming local events in New South Wales and also in the Northern Territory. For those of you in the area, details are currently being shared on the screen. Or again, you can visit the website to find out more about that. And we encourage you to follow our LinkedIn page where we also post regularly about all upcoming events. Thank you everyone for joining us today.